Welcome everybody. My name is Patrik Schumacher, for those who don't know me. I'm the principal of this firm. We're happy to launch an event here in our gallery with John Manoocherhri, the founder of a very interesting startup company operating from San Francisco in the domain of the metaverse called Treasury. He will explain to you what it's all about. Zaha Hadid Architects, particularly through the code team in Treasury, we are invested with kind of sweat equity in the project. And we love the project. I think it's very important. Like, we also believe in the overall importance of the metaverse as a domain for a new architecture. So I will show some images and talk a little bit about what we are doing in the space, but first to John.
Thank you, Patrik. So I'll explain what we're up to and how it came about. Firstly, thank you, Patrik, for inviting us here, and welcome to, as it were, our event series. Welcoming Patrik to the content. I mean, basically, Treasury is an offshoot of my and others' work in design computation over the last 10 years. Basically, my previous company essentially is designing buildings around the flow of services in and out, deliveries, subscriptions. You can design the interfaces and spatial allocations according to the service intensity, and that platform work took me higher and higher into sort of implications of spatial computing, like how much will we end up defining the spatial environment by computational means. And as I guess everybody did during the pandemic, I started a podcast which ended up being funded by Epic Games. So I was thinking more and more broadly in this domain, and came to an arena of investigation that seemed to be very well trodden, like the population of digital spatial environments as the metaverse as a concept and spatial computing as a kind of general computational paradigm takes off. And I asked the question to a bunch of people, who is going to supply the assets to these environments? Right? If you've been involved in game development or metaverse development, to create a spatial environment is a significant endeavor, right? And even then, most of the environments are what I would call scripted environments, where you have very limited interaction capabilities rather than fully modeled environments. You can't go up to any door. Most of the buildings are just mesh exteriors. There's no interior. And that isn't the case with what people are claiming the metaverse is going to be. They need to be fully modeled environments. So there's appeared to be a bottleneck of how quality assets would be supplied. And I asked who's supplying them. Surely you want to license them from the people that have tons of back office, back catalog of assets. And somehow that wasn't being done, right? And so the 3D asset libraries, Turbo Squid, Quicksolves, and so forth, just are not doing that. They're not going to people who built their professional careers and reputations in designing the world. It's just people, hobbyists. So 2 or 3 months after that, what seemed to me an extremely clumsy idea at the end of 21, we had a venture capital round with Google's AI fund as one of the investors. And then, I mean, basically at that stage, having pitched that idea during the pandemic from my laptop in Stockholm, all I had was 9 slides, and that's it. Some millions of dollars in the bank. So Patrik was the first office, Patrik representing Zaha was the first office to say, this is what we need in the world. We need people to take seriously the idea that if you're going to populate spatial environments quickly with people and experiences, you need quality environments. Oh, and by the way, we've thought a lot about this. What is a digital environment in design and human experiential terms? So basically, Treasury is a very simple business model. It's like you're getting images for well-designed 3D assets, right? And essentially what we're trying to capture, 2 kinds of value. One is just well-designed spatial environments. Ones that are conventional designed in the default world, the ones that are also useful in digital environments, however they end up being deployed. And also just design value, right? Design identity, so that as more and more content is sucked into digital environments, creators can be sure that their IP, basically, and their brand identity is being protected. Even more important as machine learning starts sort of sucking in every content type under the sun. So essentially what Treasury has is a pretty simple set of tools that we're developing, and after about a year's worth of development, we've got like MVPs ready to show. We have some initial customers lined up. The main thing that we've been very cautious of is to stay focused on what will be useful to what we call premium creators of digital spatial assets and premium builders of digital environments. It's not really for hobbyists. We think that you can go down and down and down in consumer markets, but we have to start with the best stuff, where the value is. And so we've built a registry which enables creators to upload their assets, fingerprint them, and a discovery engine to review assets and either commission adaptations or directly license designs. So I'll just show you some of that very briefly, and so you can see roughly how it works. So let me see if I can click through here. So basically, if you go to the website, you can basically get access to the tools in various ways, find out more information. Essentially, the discovery engine looks a bit like this, right? So essentially, it's an infinite grid for browsing different kinds of assets, right? So all this is still in testing and preview, but most of these represent assets with which we have some kind of relationship ongoing or relationship under development. And so what you can see is, let's go to the staging version. Is basically a browsing grid. You can explore. Let's see here. I'm going to highlight some stuff by Zaha, then that will come up. You can select different categories of what we call supply. And essentially, once you are curious about an asset, you can go ahead and peek at it, in the WebGL viewer. Basically, the key premise here is you have to in the discovery engines, you have to download a bunch of stuff to view assets. So what we've put here is a preview of an asset that you can license. So essentially, in most cases, this is some kind of FBX or GLB in a preview format. Let's see. So, So I'm just going to load a model in the background, and some of this is not to do with our shit, by the way. It's the setup in this gallery.
It's a great project. I've been there.
Okay, well, trust me, there's a very attractive WebGL model that should render very nicely in the browser. We haven't had any glitches with
I think it's
in the last 3 months.
We only have Wi-Fi in this gallery, and you're linked into the Wi-Fi, so that's probably the reason.
Okay, well, so you can click and review it yourself. Our product is in a stable MVP state. And essentially, the browsing grid leads to a viewing system where you can fiddle with the asset in WebGL and then select it for deployment, basically. What we are now issuing is sufficiently confident in the stability of the platform for us to issue what we call private discovery engines for individual offices that can use the tool for archiving and private viewing of their assets. And essentially, on the supply side of the model, as a registry, essentially, you as a creator will go to the registry and upload your assets, previews, FBXs, whatever. And then what will happen is once see if this part of the demo breaks. Basically, the principle is that once you have put your asset into the registry, you can essentially set it up step by step for, firstly, fingerprinting, and so in principle what's going on here is that the model mesh is being fingerprinted. There's different ways that we're exploring that, but the first starting point, which is built by Sharjah and Vishu and the guys, is essentially a so-called Fourier decomposition. So you're sort of essentially taking a mathematical description of the surface form. That's an initial instance of a fingerprint, and then once the asset is then in the registry as a registered asset, you can then keep it for archiving purposes or send it for licensing by putting a license framework on it. So that is the essence of Treasury. Discovery system for people building digital environments and registry for creators. If you want to get access to this stuff and see how stable it is for yourself, right, just put your company name in front of treasury.space, all right, and then it will give you a sign-up form, right, so you can self-onboard and click around. So that's the basic idea. Registry, list register syndicate for assets on the supply side. Discovery is browsing and commissioning, essentially. And then to kind of keep the conversation moving in our direction, since spatial computing and metaverse, I think, are so crowded with shilling of overripe narratives and underdeveloped products in the case of many different platform companies and crypto stuff. We want to have much more concrete and, I think, both creatively interesting and technically grounded conversations. So we've built a content series, and this is part of that, right? We've had a ton of other events on AI, legal, all sorts of different dimensions of spatial computing and metaverse, and so that's a big part of what Treasury is up to. So this conversation is the first in a four-part series. Patrik will be at the beginning and the end of this mini-series. Sharjah and Nils will anchor the two sessions in between. January, February, and April, the next ones. And the point of this conversation is basically to set up, I think, a conversation that can become an industry reference point for what is the role of architecture in digital spatial environments. I mean, Patrik has a very strong and foundational view. I will challenge some of it, elaborate some of it, you will engage with some of it. What I think would be great is if the architecture profession as a whole, technically and creatively, has a fresh view on what's going on. Because if we take just one example, concert staging for large-scale artists, like the woman who was going to join us got ill, Kika Blasquez, Harvard-trained computational designer, was the lead for the Frugal complex canopy at Big, did some of the staging for a so-called metaverse experience for Lady Gaga. That's going to be a massive piece of creative, commercial industry development. I mean, Taylor Swift had a vast tour that came out as a concert movie. It's definitely going to come out as some kind of digital environment where the staging has to be designed by somebody. And it will not be kids on Turbo Squid, with respect. It's going to be tens of millions of dollars pumped into this. So what is the role of architecture in digital environment development? Let's see what Patrik has to say.
Thank you, John. Very exciting company you're building there. And I think there will be, and you're a pioneer in the space, and we are loading up our assets and invite everybody else to do the same and make them available for a space which will be growing like an avalanche, and we will need all back catalogs of the world plus all architectures, firms and new studios to be involved to create all these myriads of spaces which we will have and see, because every company, every organization, non-profit, for-profit, cultural, every institution, everybody who has a website will have virtual environments and spaces, and they need to be designed. It's also a good right moment to have AI come around to help. And they will be not only designed, they will be continuously evolving and be redesigned on a much faster rate than the built environment, physical built environment. So that's why I'm so confident that investing in this capacity is a massive opportunity. And the message to architects is this is the core competency of architecture is involved here, because we're talking about metaverses not as escapist fantasy worlds but spaces where you work, where you engage, where you communicate, where you're productive, communicative, and they will also be interfaced with physical spaces and this kind of digital interfacing. So I think it's a huge topic. So, and of course there were incredible anticipations through science fiction, but the middle book was very influential for me. This is late 1991, cyberspace. When the internet started, architects were onto it. Michael Bennett was the only one. The book is full of articles and studies of how a spatialized world of information communication could look like. And I taught a studio at Berlin University very soon after this called the Virtual College. And now you see universities going full on virtual or having digital. Digital campuses, etc. So wonderful. Now, why am I so gung-ho about it? That it really is a core competency to bring us together, to frame interaction, communication, and to do it through spatial organization, through making it phenomenologically and perceptually tractable, and to have a semiological project at play where you recognize the different situation quickly, move from one to the other, etc. And so, and of course, that internet is, not only a play field for social media, and that's not only play, that's seriously political discourse, cultural discourse, as well as private connections that also will go virtual in 3D, I would believe. But it's a huge aspect of the global knowledge economy, I think. This kind of productivity gain of having a division of labor which spreads around the world, and I think not much more potently, is a massive prosperity engine, and that will drive value into these spaces. And by the way, also, can you see that not only Meta, Facebook Meta, but all other major technology companies are invested in that space. Also Zoom and Microsoft Teams, they are going 3D, and etc., etc., etc. And why is it? What's the difference here? What's so important about the internet becoming that immersive internet, that cyberspace? The one part of it is a real focus on real-time communicative interaction. Also in group settings, instead of having these messages and when are you going to be picked up and then be responded to, instead of leaving traces you in real-time scenarios. The interface in a 3D, where you find your next interaction, is 360 degree all around in layer spatially, and you can navigate it, you can move and shift your view, move a few steps, and new things fall into place, and that they need to be ordered. An architect would order them in meaningful ways. And then this means also that you can have that navigation in a browsing fashion, an exploratory, intuitive fashion, instead of typing in keywords or going to websites you've already heard about. And you kind of go into a synergy network where you find something or you go to something you've heard about, and then it's surrounded by relevant other facilities and venues and interaction potentials and exhibitions, etc., etc. And that you can find, it's much more potent, I think. And then the density of when you arrive at a site, what you can do, that interaction richness with the real-time communication, but also looking at objects. I mean, exhibiting intricate physical objects, which have so much more to give than a book page or a web page, etc. So I think these are 4 compelling reasons, and I start to feel it when I'm interacting in our own metaverse, increasingly, and with many events already in our Metatopia, and we'll talk about this. I find it so compelling, except nobody's there yet. Right? Because the network effects aren't there yet. So that, there's early adopters and there's not enough traffic and the synergy networks aren't there. You go to one thing and the other things are not there. The populations are not large, but that's only a question of kicking that off. Once the network effects kick in, the avalanche is unstoppable and will, as I said, literally every single institution and a lot of privates, because there are also these sites where you can do your own kind of spaces and rooms and homes and invite friends. So it's going to be everything and everybody. Everybody who has a website or blog, anything will be virtual space. And that needs to be designed for. I mean, there will be a lot of self-designing, but B2B set in particular, on the high end, there's an enormous amount of work. I mean, by the way, when Facebook changed its name to Meta, and there were some metaverse projects around, this space kind of went through the roof in terms of value. It was the first signal.
Let me just take one more second. Okay, who's seen this before? Hands up. Okay, so don't answer the next question if you've seen this before. Okay, where do you think these people are? Just someone has to say, where do you think they are in the world? Somebody who hasn't seen it. You're all professional architects, you can speak in public. Well, you go yours next.
No, it's just, I mean, that's the Lex Friedman interview of Mark Zuckerberg. Both there are avatars in a degree of veracity which is unbelievable. And every second sentence, kind of Lex Friedman was saying, "Oh my God, I'm so floored by what is this possible? Is that you?" Because it's not only it's inanimate with all the typical features of the individual expressions, facial expressions, is in there, real time delivered into a 3D impression, and it's stunning. Anyway, I think these kind of breakthroughs, and then of course, after this huge kind of inflation of our values, it came down a little bit. And this is another hit, I think, where people realize it is coming. There's an enormous amount of stuff going on. And then, these things, Horizon workrooms, I'm just showing that we have, meetings, and all meetings we do are actually, by the way, a hybrid in this office and the school that I'm teaching. There's no, like this event, there's no going to be a physical only event. There are tons of digital only events, but in particular also in these kind of hybrid events, and they are worked on by Meta, and we worked on this at DRL with a studio about these what they call cyber urban integration and the cyber urban incubator, where these meetings could be not everybody from home coming in as an avatar, but you hear physically, and some people coming in virtually, and if they're avatars of that degree of veracity in some sort of screen or cage or in the sense of being holographically presented, that's quite amazing. And the Office of the Future would have this infusion with these kind of windows into virtual worlds, where this kind of integration and layering of physical and virtual. And that's one of my thoughts. And you can have an office building which has these scooped out caves for large virtual interactive events. So that's one kind of sets of studies we're making. So you have this kind of attempt to integrate, because it's important that the way, if the metaverse takes off, it's not going to be only through laptop screens. My screen at home is already quite large and bigger, but it will be various headsets which are now becoming transparent. It will be panoramic LED screens wrapping the whole space, cave-like structures, and I think that's going to be pretty intense. And that needs to be designed. It needs to be designed often together with the physical spaces, the interfaces. If the physical spaces are interfaces and the virtual spaces, they're ideally continuous in one design language by one designer. So we want to do this in this way. And this is a study we did actually for Meta. And I just want to show this. This is also a kind of town square. And when John was showing these kind of assets, and recently we've been realizing you can do a lot with combinatorics and modules and recombining in the digital, but also in the physical, of course. But this is much more potent in the digital, that you have these menus of elements you can draw down, and you can lease them for an event temporarily, or lease them for longer term, exclusive or non-exclusive. And that's where John has all the menu of commercializing this in a new marketplace, which generates the market for leasing these assets. So I'm just going to give you just some views of this. And again, all these objects themselves, partly physical, partly digital, and screen-based, and experienced, remotely, and as well as partly physical. Anyway, I cut this short, but also, Microsoft Mesh, of course, and companies like Accenture working with them, they're working these collaborative settings where you're working with objects. That's fantastic for designers. You have meetings around the model, and go in and have layers of information, like a Metatopia, we're sweeping sections through our architectural models. And this is one of other teams at Zaha Hadid Architects, Unity-based in this case, Tyson and his team, where we have generated a digital twin of our Beijing office, and we had design reviews. You come in, there's a model popping on the table, you can jump into the model, you can draw sketches and leave traces on the 3D geometry, and then jump out of it again. So these are the kind of things where, this might be for a physical project, or it might be for a digital project. And nearly all of our physical designs might double up as digital through these kind of digital twins. And real estate will show off their work before it's built in this fashion. But also, a lot of these spaces can have a parallel life. They be used virtually while they use physical. And we have a whole number of clients in China, in Thailand, and in Singapore who are thinking like that. And also, for instance, interesting for you, we have this asset line. We had an exhibition in Beijing with 80 models, 80 projects, and we did a full-on 3D virtual recreation of this, where you have the space, the layout, everything, all 80 models. You can go to them, and then you can go home in on one, and they're very well detailed. You can click on them and then be with that model on the next level of detail and go into the model as well. So here we're building these asset catalogs, and we're really grateful to have this experience to clients, and they can say, okay, I would like to have that. And in the digital, you can rent the space, for a day, for a weekend, for 3 months, etc. And anyway, so this is the kind of capacities we're building in this firm, gearing up for that new world. We cut that short. And existing buildings where we have 3D digital versions of that, and play a navigation game where you kind of finding a space, and then you track people's eye views to find out how would people navigate a space like this, to test its navigability and phenomenology through kind of 3D version of it. But then again, why not use that space for other means, for hosting virtual events, etc. And we have a great partner called Metaverse, who were in the exhibition business and showroom business, and they're now selling private jets in the metaverse. That happened, of course, through COVID, where so many firms had to reinvent themselves, and we were happy to not reinvent themselves totally, but to make a new step. So with these guys, we met them, and we developed Lieberland, which now is physically kicking off. By the way, people are settling in Lieberland finally after 7 years of being arrested, and we generated this virtual Lieberland, and it kicked off the Lieberland community more, and we had a number of events, conferences with 25 short lectures and different booths at different levels where people could stand and show videos and discuss, and you can roam around, and it was a satisfying event, like you would have a conference, very different from just a Zoom grid, where you see a few faces and an endless list of people, and there's no intermission, no before and after chats, and here was a lot of nice after chats. I met a few people, actually potential investors into this, and here you can see kind of us lecturing and etc. etc. So this was one step where we first got the hint, wow, with kind of new Unreal Engine, and we developed all these assets for specifically crypto companies. So Lieberland was meant to be a kind of ecosystem, industrial creative hub for the crypto community. But when we worked on this, we realized that all our real kind of the clients we found and worked with were mostly architects and designers. And by the way, this is another little thing we're doing. This idea of cataloging asset catalogs, that you can play with them maybe in a gaming environment. This is with a big gaming kind of developing company, but they want to go from playground into real educational and designer territory. So you have a catalog, you can, in-game, you can start to select pieces from the place pieces. It's a development piece at the moment, it's not finished. And start aggregating them, shifting them around, placing them, shrinking them, enlarging them. Sorry, I want to also shift that one. And so again, I think this will democratize this world, will bring in creatives and shifting, making that kind of technology transfer, this shift out of the world. All these technologies we're now employing were developed in the video gaming and multi-user game world. Where it was, escape play, shooting, this technology transfer into the world of creative work, of collaboration, of where we're just extending and interlacing with our physical, social, productive world. That's what I find exciting. And again, the architecture is very serious. And then what we're asking these players to do is to build constellations on fantastic London sites. We don't know yet what we're doing with them, but one thought is, okay, let the players build them and then, use them. Use them for events and put their showrooms into them, etc. So totally different versions you can kind of create with that. And then just, we did a metaverse exhibition space for Baidu. So in China is a huge story, by the way. It doesn't connect so well, but it's a parallel world. And here we went a bit kind of out of the normal. We can sometimes say, well, this metaverse architecture have to recreate physical architecture. There's many reasons to be closely connected and initially built on what we know and learning our way of inhabiting the city, the buildings. But you can also go beyond that. So the Möbius strip is fun. It's not random that you're flying around, but you can move on the surface as it winds itself on. Just as a little thing. Super quick, Metatopia is that metaverse startup company we generate, and this is where we're investing most of our energy to parallel to Treasury. This is for the whole design ecosystem of not only architects but fashion designers, car design, product design, industrial design, and bringing together not only companies but events like we have the virtual Venice Biennale, the virtual Chicago Architecture Biennale. We want to bring schools in here. We have SciArt also in the Biennale, etc. And we just launched a new kind of piano we're designing, and we're working with fashion designers, building up the show. And what is fascinating, you can be quite intensive. The amount of buildings and spaces we can roam freely and continuously, not only through teleporting, but literally roaming and moving around in teams. And we have some of the buildings inside as models. Sometimes some of the buildings popping up outside as real scale buildings. It's at the moment invitation only, but those who have registered, they can come back and roam around as much as they like at the moment for free. And we had great events there, panel discussions. We have Candy Schacter, NFTism gallery in there, and that's the way we show these architectural models with a great model you can roam around and look at from all sides, a video that is playing, and then you can look from one to the other. So this is Archi Union, Philip Yuan, great Chinese architect, MAD in the background. We have, this is the MAD building, we have Coop Himmelblau, Theo Seropolis in minimal forms, and it's OMA, the new hospital. And again, as I said, at UN Studio, this is a commercial project. Some are futuristic projects, some are built already, and you can see in the background, it's also in full scale. So you can also go out in full scale. You can also quickly move from one to the other here. And the rendering of these are fantastic, really high resolution, and for what designers love, they can do it. And then you have collective events around it, and you enjoy it together, speak about it, etc., etc. Make screenshots, put them on YouTube, on Instagram, etc., etc. This is the piano launch, etc. Fusujimoto. It's just the beginning, and that's what we want. We want this to be really aggregate all the firms, all the designers, all the institutions into a more intense cityscape. So I believe in the metaverse as these kind of maybe specialized cities for creative industries, particularly certain hubs, but a large city roads of several of these districts, because that's, I think, what we want. We want not only isolated virtual space, which is then maybe hyperlinked, but being clustered together with other relevant spaces, events, move from one to the other in the cityscape, and that we can do. So this is ZHA City, where we've collected some of our buildings and created a city out of it. Some of you who are familiar with our work will recognize, some of the projects like Baku or Shanghai project, the Shanghai Science Museum. Some built, some under construction, some lost competitions are thrown in as well. And I think it's a fascinating, show the capacity that you get all of this and the engine runs and you can roam from one to the other and with a lot of detail, with the full detail we discussed. This is Zaragoza Bridge, fantastic bridge, was finished 15 years ago, and it comes back to life in the setting. So I think that is really fascinating, and that's why I think I'm so convinced that this will take off massively. And I'm reinterpreting older student projects as metaverse projects. What the new London could be, and I had a whole studio on metaverse urbanism, and where we went, create the cityscapes, develop the different institutions, the way they were intervisible and interware, and you can fly and move and jump to various spaces, roam around, and key public spaces were designed. So this parametric urbanism paradigm, I think, is taking off in the metaverse, and then will finally influence the real world. And I'll just leave you with this, that again, we have sometimes less closely connected to what we known as a physical. So I also believe that it could be quite thrilling that some of these assets will be more uniquely metaverse only, but we still need probably some kind of orientation through gravity, some kind of clue about materiality, etc. But it could take off from there. So that's what I find exciting, and I mean, it's wonderful to have a marketplace where all these works can be viewed and recombined and proliferate. Anyway, that's what I want to say, and so you can see that I'm absolutely into this, and I have been for a while, so thanks.
So Pico Velasquez was going to join us, but she's ill. A couple other people have been interested in joining. Martha, head of research at Foster and Partners, and some others, but they will almost only join the second, third, and fourth sessions in this mini-series. I mean, my first question to you, Patrik. So because the third speaker isn't here, you are now the third speaker, right? So I expect extremely thoughtful input, but feel free to put your hand up or jump at any point and we'll work it in. If it's thoughtful, if it's not thoughtful, I'll say we're not going to talk about it. So basically, Patrik, what is for you the simplest definition of the metaverse? I mean, where I'm going with this, is it a specific unified digital environment? Is it a more broad technical or social premise? Give us the root definition of it.
Well, I think the dream is that it's a unified global space where you can move freely from one to the other. So we've been talking about people like, Herman Arula from Improbable, where they want to have an ecosystem of metaverses where they also make connections, where you make portals from one into the other, and that it is seamless, like the website. You can jump from any website to any other website. Theoretically, you make the link. Of course, not all make links, otherwise it would be overpowering, but that you have specific, meaningful linking. So the linking up, first will bring as many of the venues and events and opportunities for communication and display and engagement into one directly connected, and then go beyond and have these different worlds connect up. So that's what I think the metaverse will be. For now, we have metaverses, and I think Metatopia is at the moment at the cutting edge of what a metaverse could be and should be, in my view, which has nothing to do with video gaming and teenagers playing, but with serious firms and creatives and audiences coming together.
Okay, so if we're talking about interoperability, how close are we to that being realized? Right, I mean, the beginning of the web as a technical architecture was basically that it started with protocols, right? And we don't have those, in part because there's a lot of commercial actors with quite competing interests, although each of them say it's all open. What they really mean is it's open if you join us. Technically, and actually go as deep as you like technically, because these are all dorks. How far are we from an actually technically integrated community of metaverses?
I'm not sure, but the commercial pressure is on. Everybody talks about interoperability, and if you want to have an asset, you want to have it deployable everywhere, and you want to break these barriers down. If you invest into an avatar, for this fantastic avatars, these avatar companies, they also want to be moving everywhere. It means some of the metaverses have been kind of early creators like Decentraland on the back foot, but the value pressure will be in this direction, and everybody's talking about it, and everybody wants it, and a platform like Treasury could play a critical role in this as well. But there's also, even if you start in different universes, as it were, there are some metaverses now, for instance, ingest Unreal Engine setups equally with Unity worlds, and they become kind of how should I say, neutral with respect or indifferent. And that's the way to forward. And of course, you also have these great integrating, like Epic with Unreal Engine has so many of these projects are based on this, so that they become by default interoperable. We also, and you can also see that the kind of the interaction language, the language of interaction, the interaction design, and the features you look for and how things work when you navigate, they're already kind of, and that comes out of video game language. They already have a certain kind of unified way, and that's also important.
So more on the supply side, how far are we from a pipeline, technically speaking, of asset development that will facilitate a unified technical metaverse type platform? Because on the supply side, I mean, roughly speaking, you have people that come from the architecture tradition where they're building in solid modeling software, right, arbitrarily precise objects, and then you have people from the gaming world who are kind of scanning things and putting up meshes and trying to fake content, basically. And none of that stuff is converging so far on a unified file format or technical pipeline. I mean, to some extent, universal scene description is helping, but do you have a sense of there's less pressure on convergence there? How will that play out?
Vishu, why don't you tell us? This is not the kind of, I'm not into these kind of technicalities. I just know it will happen. But if you want a technical answer, maybe you have to go.
Repeat the question.
No, you didn't. Okay. Technical interoperability in terms of designers and from the video game world and the architectural world, and then how everything can meet in a kind of format which makes it interoperable.
Yeah, there are quite a few formats which are currently being tested. One of the formats is USD, where like a lot of it was developed by Pixar 35 years ago, and then like a lot of the AEC industry is also moving towards that kind of unified formats. But there is also IFCs, which are also being explored on the physical delivery of the project. But I think USD would become a universal kind of format for exchange of files, and all of the game engines already support this, including NVIDIA and Omniverse also supports this.
Okay, well, so if you may or may not be interested in that. Patrik's definitely interested in that, exactly how it's going to work, but it is an issue how you supply files out. It's a big problem for us because everyone says, oh, let's build the metaverse and license it out. And I'm saying to Patrik, okay, give me your archive, and the archive is a giant mess. But so there's a practical blockage here. In terms of actual experiences, do you feel that people actually want to explore and spend time in digital environments that aren't heavily scripted? right? Because I understand that, people, current metaverse concepts and digital environments are underpopulated, and where they are populated, it seems to be because there's a quest or a script or a very simple premise, just shoot whoever's in front of you. If we don't have that narrative or that pre-configured script, is there a reason to be there even if we have much more attractive environments? How do you create because you said the synergy in social graphs, how do we get people to do things there? What should they be doing there?
Well, it's not a right. I mean, what should happen there comes out of the purposes which we usually know from the physical world. So if you want to host a global conference and you have 20 parallel lectures and you have a big get together and then you have networking events, these are the things, the scripts, inverted commas, which come from the purposes and criteria of productivity or in having a good experience. And that's where this comes from. And of course, then with the new technical possibilities, you can also be inventive and not only recreate, you can have additional potentials of, for instance, scanning the participants and then clicking them and jumping next to them. That's something I'm doing a lot now in the metaverse, which you wouldn't otherwise do. So I'm not worried about that there would be, people wouldn't know what to do. Right, they're coming into specific spaces with specific purposes and also protocols of engagement. And then you can be, then it's the hosts. There will always be hosts who invite people into an event and make sure and want to make sure, because it's part of their kind of commercial or non-commercial mission to make this a satisfying, all-around satisfying kind of engagement in the event. And I think the conferencing is one which is great. Exhibitions, like I showed you glimpses of, is absolutely perfect. I think, and satisfying. And so you know what you can and meant to do there. And the next stage for me in terms of is also, for instance, pushing architecture forward. I've been thinking a lot in recent years about making architecture more interactive so that the spaces aren't static, that they expand, but then the audience expands. That is also cajoling and probing, maybe breaking up a meeting or transforming it a bit. It becomes stale and there's not enough talk anymore. Breaking up embarrassing silences, but also a lot of flexible and mobile elements, and that I think can be developed in the metaverse quite nicely around these events. And then this can migrate back into the real world. So what I've been calling responsive environments and recently more kind of robotic environments, creative, adaptive environments. That's something which will, again, the driver will be the events, that you want to have met with everybody, potentially, or seen all the offerings and made your selections and then had some in-depth conversations, whatever you're up to, or learning something new. These success criteria coming out of our social lives and what we're pursuing. And then the architectural layouts, they are framing and trying to deliver that. And what we can have in the metaverse, we can have new means of delivering towards it.
Okay, let me take a quick moment to show that we do actually have a functioning product. And it's crashing the browser, but basically it's a WebGL viewing system with different kind of test environments, right? So what you see is an asset in a preview form, and you can then request that the asset is sent to your deployment environment, as it's called. And commercially, that's a light box where you can select pricing and different kind of file formats for actual use. But also you can send it to the curation tool, which is an Unreal Engine viewer, if you want a very high-end preview, which you'll have to pay for. But this is just a WebGL sort of preview environment so that you can have tons of assets available via a web browser without any downloads. So we built something, crashes the browser somewhere, but it works, and you should get access to it and then tell us how to do it better. On that point, do you think that is Apple saying something in its preview of the Vision headset by essentially not having any interactive activities at all, right? Because I think that they may be saying, so feel free to challenge this, is that technically and psychologically or socially we're not really ready for interactive experiences, fully immersive interactive experiences of the sort you're describing, except for maybe passive like events like meetings. I mean, I can say that, you know, if anyone's tried Meta's Horizon Worlds, one of the most strange, almost shocking aspects of it is when you are going through the onboarding stages. First, it takes you a ton of time to be told how to use the interfaces. And the whole multi-step sequence is, this is how to be safe in the environment you're about to enter. And there's a panic button, and there's an exit button and whatnot. You think, well, this doesn't feel like a great place to be. If you went to a nightclub and, you know, you had to be trained what to do if something went wrong, you probably wouldn't spend much time there or go on at all. So is Apple onto something? Is there something we need to learn socially, psychologically, and is there something problematic technically about deeply immersive environments that are fully interactive?
I'm not sure, but what you're describing in terms of the Meta Horizon, I mean, a company like Facebook, these corporates, they great in many ways, but they have to tread too carefully. That's why, you know, that makes also opens up the space for other firms who don't have these problems yet. You're not going to be, you know, called into Congress to explain things. So when when Facebook tried to do a new kind of cryptocurrency, they were kind of blocked, and then others can do it. And so Decentraland and other metaverses can come out with stuff which Facebook would find too difficult, too risky. And that's a bit of a shame. I think we have to be more risk tolerant in general in this culture. And yeah, I don't think that's great. And as a startup company, this will creep onto you much slower as you go along, and you can explore at the beginning a bit more with much more risk appetite.
So when we started the company, we wrote a whole thesis on how this technical space is going to play out, and we sent it to the venture investors, and they were like, we don't fucking care. If it's either huge or it's not, don't give us your theory bullshit. But actually I think it matters, because from our perspective, when the metaverse as a narrative last year became less attractive to investors, it appeared that it was tanking, it's like a boat, but appeared to be wasting lots of money. People hadn't thought through that he wasn't just going to put little cartoon avatars in space and hope that 3 billion people would use it. He knew that photoreal, post-Uncanny Valley avatars were coming, and we were in this infrastructure that he was building. But last year, the metaverse narrative kind of collapsed a bit, and our investors were saying to us, well, you know, we couldn't possibly invest in you again. It was a nice try. It's all going to, you know, whatever. We were like, we never said that the metaverse as a binary premise was the gig, right? Spatial computing will have many layers. And I don't know if this counts yet as a disagreement. I will probably find some disagreements with Patrik before we finish this meeting, but something in terms of like a nuance is, I think that metaverse is to cyberspace as internet is to spatial computing, on the basis that when the internet was an initial proposition becoming mature at the beginning of the 21st century, a lot of narrative was around cyberspace. We're going to go to cyberspace, but we do not go to the internet. The internet is everywhere, and there's tiny bits of the internet in everything. And I think that the correct way to think about spatial computing as the kind of container or the larger environment for metaverse is essentially to say bits of digital environment's going to be in everything, right? When you want to look at a cafe and a restaurant, you're booking a table, let's spin up the 3D model so I can check. And it needs to be an actual 3D model, a 360 photo, so you can look behind and see all angles. Yeah, that's a great place to be. That will take you 7 seconds, right? And that will be everywhere. That's not a metaverse. We haven't scripted it. You know, there's no, your friends aren't there. There's no complex interaction. But it's spatial computing, which relies on there being a whole industry of supplying assets that are fully modeled or sufficiently modeled for that kind of thing. And so I think I do think where the conversation goes with, will we have, this is why the question I just asked was a little bit provocative. I think we'll get to all these experiences, but we'll have a lot of interstitial technical build out and layering of experiences before we get there. I mean, Apple, I think, is focusing on productivity, where you sit with a fake 2D screen or a giant headset, because it's probably going to be the thing that is least controversial and most effective. It's kind of like an 8K screen at 75-inch diagonal for a cheaper than the actual buying the thing. And then you can do all sorts of other stuff. I mean, that's the pricing, right? A 75-inch TV is close to the price of the headset, so something's going to work there. Who are the adopters, or what are the applications, other than, let's say, events, right, that you think will add most value most quickly and draw the most people in to create the synergy networks you described?
Well, the synergy networks, they there's communication. But looking at this kind of digital twin office and so on, I think I'm going to start doing my design reviews in the spaces and going into the model, and it could be in any kind of sketch form and sketching on it. So this collaborative element, this collaborative work around a product which will always be digitally represented, whether it becomes physical later or stays digital, or is more information on abstract. That's the other thing which is interesting, that once we're in that, what you call spatial computing, it's also this handling of spreadsheets, now in 3D spreadsheets, right? That was the vision actually of the early metaverse renderings, that they were looking at as libraries, as 3D spaces, information spaces, retrieving information, finding things, ordering items, like in a gigantic digital library, 3D, rather than real-time interaction. I was quite curious. A lot of these early metaverse spaces were this, but this is still also an element of this. And if you remember, we actually had a VR. We have a VR little team, a group, and we generated this kind of financial trading system where you see the globe, and you see value charts spiking off the planet, and then you can dig into this and have graphs which is three-dimensional, epic landscapes, etc., etc. So that is another I think aspect, which is collaborative, working together over a spreadsheet. You can go quick into the detail rather than opening another spreadsheet and zooming into it. So I see a lot of that information labor. So a bit like we gathering around a 3D model, and then go, okay, can I jump into this room and inflate that, as well as more abstract representations. We have always this kind of conversation about all our metrics in the company, and they're just at this moment, this is Excel, but I think there's a 3D Excel to come, maybe jumping into, for instance.
So one of the categories of customers that appear to be coming in our direction is event promoters, and I think what we've experienced so far, people are saying, can we have a speculative concept to create some kind of virtual event? But I think probably one of the most powerful, in value terms and experiential terms, simple demonstrations of instantiations of what I think you're saying is going to be large staged concert tours where the artist and the concert promoter want to multiply by a factor of 5 or 10 the number of people that can experience the event. $200 for Taylor Swift ticket at the live event, $50 for a virtual event, where the staging is going to have to be the same to a certain degree to create an anchoring identity. The economics of rock music changed when U2 started doing these huge, heavily staged concert tours, because it became clear that as CDs were tanking as a revenue driver for large-scale artists, tours could be the thing. People would pay tickets for experience, and then they'd buy merch, and it would be a whole thing, and it would drive narrative in a way that CDs weren't in any way, revenue and narrative and community and so forth. And I think that will be a big piece where it's happening right now, right? The revenue drivers are there, and the technology is ready, because audiences from an event are a somewhat passive participation. Like in a cinema, the value is part of the value is you are with other people, but you're not really interacting with them. You're sort of laughing together and so forth. And so that boundary where it's likely interactive and likely participatory, but largely passive, I think is going to be a great starting point.
Absolutely, and Improbable we're working with, they have these kind of massive events and huge crowd dynamic, and there's something thrilling about this. I'm not totally immune to it. It's not the thing I'm usually into. But there's another. There's basically so many avenues and opportunities which are explored simultaneously, and it will eventually all kind of come to us as an avalanche, I'm very sure.
Do you think, so this is super speculative, and you touched on it, how far will so the way we describe in Treasury, like the requisites or the nature of how spatial design is done in the real world, we call that the reason why that's the way it is because of what we call default tectonics, right? Which is that the structure of built objects and the spaces that they contain or define is to some extent delineated by the structures that can be created by the physics of the world we're in, right? Compression structures, tensile structures, they have their nature. Technology that we have has this character, and that's what we call default tectonics. And so when you look at the virtual city you described, right, that is in spatial form an echo of the default tectonics of the world we're in, right? You have pioneered much more fluid.
It can be expanded. You can push the parameters out of range. You can make things lighter. You can. I mean, there are also other dynamics. I mean, if you look at comic strips and animations and so on, they have kind of their own laws, quasi-laws.
So my question is, how far does that go, right? Where is that going to end up?
It goes as far as it still is meaningful, not as a spectacle, but it enhances the experience that we're after. So, for instance, I can imagine that a 3D audience, which uses more the 3 dimensions, gets more intervisibility between people and more sense of the crowd. Then, that's why you're bringing up the ranks and bringing them together. Maybe that can go further, and also the scaling of the actors dynamically, who comes up and speaks. Maybe there's a lot of that. It's still laws. It's still kind of regulated by invented laws. And I think the whole thing of parametrism was for me interesting, that we used a lot of these tools which coming out of physics and fluid dynamics, but we could kind of push and material, tectonic behavior, like what Frei Otto has developed in physical models. But we can push these logics out of parametric range, but they will still be lawful and you can articulate more, and that would still make sense because it is kind of rule-based in interesting ways. And so and it was hard to build this stuff, and in the end, through Tectonics we brought back the real physical constraints, and working with them, that's more clever. But in Metaverse we don't have to do that. So I think that it's up for grasp for inventing these worlds, but they should have social protocols. They should also have morphological laws of formation and laws of interaction. Action, reaction. What you can maybe make a gesture and you can push somebody. Anyway, I see Jan wants to say something.
Sure.
Easy.
Well, I think first of all, thank you. It's really interesting. But the one thing I'm really most excited about is the whole educational space. Because I think when it comes to learning, we are also in different headspaces where for some it's more visual, for some it's more audio based. There's one more 2D, some more 3D, and suddenly you can actually start to think to deliver content in a highly bespoke fashion. Because also I believe that this future metaverse is not. It kind of sets us free from this current setting in which we are still designing digital interfaces, which is like one website that has to cater for everyone. And I think where we were going is that through generative AI, we're going to have the freedom to actually deliver content in a highly customized fashion. So it can actually be a very different experience how you experience the content to how I experience the same content. And so I think when it comes to learning or the whole educational space and how we deliver content, there's a massive, exciting opportunity.
I'll comment just to kind of bounce off Patrik's point. So in research about these kinds of things, and in general, the kind of the research or the science of interfaces, it's kind of interesting to see that the information transfer is kind of gated to some extent by human faculties, and it's like something at the boundary of the technical limitations of the human faculties. So if we take the web classically, it's basically a text-based medium. One reason why the web isn't very good and WebGL keeps crashing is because it's designed for words, right? Not really for images. And so that is one way of gating the amount of information we can experience. When you start putting 3D content, like immersive 3D content, you can bring the eyes into play. You have to make sure it is good enough not to give you a headache or induce uncanny valley effects, but when it works, it works. I mean, the Lex Friedman podcast, he couldn't stop saying, this works. It works. The uncanny valley is gone. I don't get a headache. I think you're there. But then you need to bring in other faculties to start expanding the experiential bandwidth, basically. So you can start thinking about sound. Well, one of the interesting things about the Oculus headset, if you've ever tried it, is that the surround sound is incredibly good. It is deeply immersive, and that's one other piece of research. Other researchers that say, well, what if we're going to go to this place beyond default tectonics to what Patrick's describing, is what we call alternative tectonics. I think something that will stabilize. There'll be the fortnight alternative tectonics, where currently you can fly, but still there's the ground, right? You can't teleport, you can fly. And there'll be others, right? You maybe have wings, whatever. And I think to make that stable in any way, because what you're describing I think is exactly right, that alternative technologies will become stable in the way that game mechanics and gameplay is stable for different kinds of games. You get used to it, get good at it, is possibly involving expanding even more that sensory bandwidth. I mean, one of the pieces of experimentation has been in the senses beyond the conventional five senses. I thought, what is beyond five senses? But of course you have this sense of heat and the sense of balance, and there's all these senses when you start thinking of it that we actually have extreme sensitivity to. So haptic suits, all sorts of small interventions that trigger new signaling that we just aren't used to. If you wanted to fly, how will you experience that? Your feet are on the ground. Maybe a haptic suit would help with that. So it's not just that headsets are coming and surround sound audio is coming, smell is not likely coming, because that's our separate problems, but we will have things that I think induce us into a state of sensation that open up this sensory bandwidth, which aren't being talked about because there haven't been the applications for it yet. But now that the visual piece is being solved, that is going to take off. So this question of what comes, like your Mobius thing, how far does that go? Who defines what that is? What devices do you need? How do you socialize around it? How do you create narrative and experiential value and content and experiences around it? I think all this stuff is coming. And the weird thing is there's been huge amounts of research about it in the background. And back to your point, one of the main ways this will be applied, I do think, is education and mental health. Right? One of the other sort of partner categories coming in for us is ADHD, the sort of mental health dimension of education, and other mental health applications. And I think one of the things that's fascinating right now is the explosion into clinical practice of psychedelics. Well, psychedelics, what do? They break down the default tectonics of our experiential interface. We're flying, we're moving in different ways. Something's going on there, right? And so I think that if people think that what's happening here is we're just kind of sucking up to Zuckerberg and putting our business into shitty cartoon environments, it's the most shallow insight into this stuff. Because if we believe in psychedelics, it's partly because we are liberated from our shells and our sensory barriers and the constraints of default tectonics. And so I think where Patrik is excited is, from our perspective, the interface of infinite research-based opportunity. It's not just speculative shit and people selling stuff in a new environment. And I think that is the thing that architects can probably most help solve, and artists to some extent, is, oh, holy shit, we can apply this to countless domains of human engagement. A lot of the research is there, some of the technology is there, and if you start turning that, widening that aperture of opportunity, it gets interesting very fast. We have two separate research communities trying to join in. We'll have a whole separate research series of content here, because the amount of research in mental health education relating to, they call it VR, but it's essentially digital environments and spatial computing, is huge, and they know they're about to get taken seriously. The company we met that did VR and ADHD stuff, I'm pretty sure they're going to be on stage with Apple at some point in the next year, because Apple's going to promo that shit way quicker than the stuff you're showing, all this game stuff. That's the Apple way. We do responsible things, boring stuff, and then all the fun stuff comes later. But so that's not a direct answer to your question, but I think education is part of a very wide range of things that are just going to find new ways. The education project you've introduced us to, right, the conversation we've had with them is one that leads straight back to what you've been showing, which is, well, what environment do you want? They showed us this absurd classroom shit. I'm like, what do you think that's doing? You want a book there, you want the teacher there, why? Why not rethink that? And they, well, how are we going to rethink it? We're like, we've got ideas, we can design this for you. Let's work with other great designers to rethink the entire premise of the interface. What is a pedagogic experience when you aren't constrained by default tectonics or even the classic sensory bandwidth or interfaces that we're used to in the world of default tectonics?
And I think at some point you just really get to a point where all we're doing is we're just defining some sort of key parameters of the setting, and then it becomes a truly interactive experience where your presets, your preference is actually generating a spatial experience that suits you and your needs in this particular setting. And I think that is it's an interesting future evolution where this digital interaction really becomes two ways, and it becomes truly interactive. Because today we are all stuck with whatever this app is offering me or this website, things that I like to engage with. But I think what we are now seeing is the possibility to customize all these experiences on a personal level, which I'm super excited about. Where it's just the next step of spatial experience that we're starting to see.
I think so. One thing that Patrik showed, I was bringing up here, is basically if you design spaces, physical spaces well enough, and you think through digital environments carefully enough, what you can get to is hybrid environments that are this one, that genuinely will change the way things actually work. There's a huge amount there's always been, right, since the modern world started after the war, an excitement about internationalization. And wouldn't it be great if people from different countries were learning together? Has there been any progress in that? Fucking none. And it should be an embarrassment to the policy community. I mean, I started my career at the United Nations, got so frustrated by the lack of clarity and competency to get quite simple ideas done that wrote a book for them on urban consumption and then left. This specific design is probably going to enable joint classrooms around the world. Not that hard. I mean, it could cost $50 to create a plywood version of that stage. And all it needs is a digital analog to facilitate interfacing. And hey presto, you've got people looking at each other, listening to the same lecturer. And it ought to be a disgrace in the conversation on education that there isn't real engagement with this yet. Because there's so many areas where we want this to happen, right? Where we want there to be new forms of interaction. And that specific piece, Patrik uses quite the most hideous word, phygital, which I think should be banned. Hybrid environment, please. Digital and physical. Patrik said when I'm putting up the slides for the grid, he said, "Can you get some nice pictures? Those are crappy." I'm like, "Okay, well, you give us your photo library, and we'll do it better. We'll use better photos if you stop using the word phygital." That'll be a good deal. The point is that this is ready now, actually, right? It doesn't need a lot of technology to get to that, but the missing piece is good design that actually spans digital environment building and the physical world. And so this is, for me, fascinating, and I've been seeing a bunch of the stuff. This is why I think it's right to start this conversation here, because when I've spoken to other officers, say, "Well, we're good at this too." I'm like, "Well, show it off then, right? Tell the world that you're doing it." When I pitched this project to Zaha via Sharjah in the beginning of last year, he said, I don't know, well, it sounds interesting, but I've got to check with the boss. 45 minutes later, the message from Patrik was, "Holy fuck, yes, let's go." And that, I think, is fair enough, right? It's right that we take this seriously, because there shouldn't be any reason why the things we want in health and education are not massively accelerating. It's not just entertainment and fun stuff.
Yeah. There's also something about the fact that, Patrik and at the AAA, I guess, you have been just dealing with this for such a long time, right? And it's also fair to say that, for someone who just has started thinking about this a couple of years ago, they obviously are at a different stage in the way they process and think and imagine all these things. And so I think we just have to also accept the fact that these things develop at their own speed, and things are coming together quite beautifully, I think, on every front. We are very convinced, that USD is a big step forward, right? And we are really going into we changed all our production pipeline at Sprint to be completely real time, and at the core, it's an USD pipeline. And so I feel like a lot of things had to kind of fall in place, or are falling in place at the moment, that are just the underlying infrastructure that will allow for all of this to happen. And then we have to give everyone time to engage with it and figure out what it actually means for them. And so I think it's one of those things where we all think that all should have happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, but it might take another 10 before it actually is happening. But what excites me is that we are still starting to see real world use cases right now that actually work that we can do today. And this is the ones
it might take another 5 years, it might take another 20 years, but the key thing is people should stop pretending that they know what the future is, right? And if people are claiming that we want to get on with social objectives, stop trashing technology, right? The idea that big platforms are inherently damaging to social progress is total nonsense. And I think that narrative needs to be unwound a bit. I mean, to be fair, education and health have kind of tried some of this stuff and failed, and so they kind of, it's like a lot of people. But I think certainly the public narrative, the technical narrative, shouldn't be, those platform companies that just want to sell us shit in a hideous cartoon environment, right? That's kind of the meta narrative right now. The one other piece, right, which is where my work comes from, and I didn't say this up front because Patrik would be so annoyed by this, is focused on sustainability of the built environment, right? I know that isn't Patrik's key priority, but if what you wanted to do was to make the physical world more efficient in terms of the deployment of physical resources and energy, and also you wanted to use spatial design to facilitate more efficient ways of living, so rather than designing car parking into building, you would design car sharing systems or whatever sort, right? That's what my other company does. You would want good models of the built world with masses of data attached to them, so you know what the fuck is going on. And so we want Treasury to be a repository not just of sexy models, which is what Patrik is saying, every model of every building to which we attach spatially instantiated data streams of every sort. So we can be the broker, not just of the IP data of a nice model, but every other data stream, occupancy, energy, airflow. And so we built the index basically for every building in the world, where essentially we're inviting real estate operators and developers to upload models that they have, commission models they don't have, attach data streams to it so that they can commission the data streams, or they can license out and broker out the data streams privately or with privacy.
I mean, what my project always been under the headline of a semi-logical project is that when you step into an environment, it gives the end user, those who immerse themselves within that, all the information they could want to empower them to make the fullest use of the resources which are deployed, the events, the people, the informations, the objects. And that is, and what you're talking about is information overlay, technical maybe in the production process. I'm focusing on the user experience and empowering the actual life process after we have come together as experts and designers and so on. And that's non-trivial, and I think you can, that's where also the default tectonics are hard to overcome, because there is an enormous amount of information encoded when I step into an urban environment, which isn't easily replicated in a cartoon, clearly. The degree of decay, the kind of characters moving around, how you walk tells a lot. There's so much where this is relative to each other in a city, within a building, etc., etc., etc. All of this information, I'm talking about information-rich environments, and that's empowering. And when you, as a designer, want to work with this and further enhance that, because there's also a lot of arbitrary visual and semi-logical noise in the environment. If you want to streamline this and enhance that, that's the exciting project. So that's and if you'd say something sexy, that's that's to put to one side is maybe another layer and element where you want to have something which is life enhancing. You want that to be appealing and also to become conspicuous potentially. So these things, for me, I'm always instrumentalizing. I'm not into kind of superficial spectacle, but the world of appearances, I mean, talking about the instrumentality of appearances is very, very important. And to do do that, we have to connect and understand how the current physical environment works. We need to work with the competencies we've acquired, which are non-explicit. They're totally ingrained and intuitive, and nobody can write them down. Or that in itself is a scientific project of enormous complexity. And so the best strategies initially imitate and photorealism, which you're always calling for, because it brings, you don't know what you're bringing in, you're bringing in more. And now the acoustics also is important, and you talked all the senses, sense of smell, acoustic, vestibular sense of temperature, all of that could be instrumentalized and is to some extent. Background noise, where you are, where the street is, and so on and so forth. So to kind of be innovative on top is interesting, and I'm into it. But it's quite a thing. So if you do a lot of this, then you also lose a lot probably, which you don't know that you didn't even know what you had. That's my response to that. But I'm still interested, of course, to go beyond, but in a kind of deeply investigative way, and paralleling to this, there's the creative, trying crazy things way, but they need to be filtered through those with an investigated agenda.
We first have to understand where we come from, by what we have, and this is where we're already failing. I think whether you look at it from an energy performance and sustainability point or from an experiential point, right? I mean, just to explain how we perceive spatial conditions, right? And what are the parameters that constitute this experience, obviously is a starting point that is, we can't skip that bit, right? If we don't understand, this world, then...
And the other thing is, because, let's say we're talking about, I like this idea of information overlays, and this idea of Google glasses and maybe highlighting people for you or putting text labels on top. But once we shift into this kind of graphic text labeling and symbolism, that maybe we can embed it in the direct physiognomy itself, rather than having, the more you go into written text, where you have to concentrate, where everything is on the eye and the concentrated look and read, it limits. But I think we have other ways of taking in a gestalt, an atmospheric gestalt, which has a lot of nuance and differentiation. So that's an interesting one in terms of the cognitive density of information and the limitations, although I still think it's interesting to play with virtual overlays when you look into space and interfacing and so on, but they should need to be equally intuitive, and you can take them in a mode of distraction, etc. And we can get there. It's also training the brain and us. For instance, if you look at blind people, the way they can run their hand across a kind of relief pattern and take in, is quite amazing. So there's also potential that we can take in more than we used to. If the environment would have this new level of encoded richness of information, and it would be vital to us and would pay for us to learn more and more of this. It's not that I'm learning kind of for 2 years in a dictionary, but I pick up more if I need more, if it's there. And therefore we should seed more of this information and make more of the randomness of the way a lot of materiality, color, positionality is disposed of without having intricate correlation with purposes and information. There's a lot of there to be to empowering for every participant, because that's also required so that they become more effective. If you have to pick out that situation out of 500, which was really the one which they should have been a part of, and not kind of missing everything in a kind of noisy nonsense environment.
And I'll come back to this just to set up a little bit, just with 2 comments on like testing. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about venture capital-backed companies and venture capital in general is that part of the public narrative is, why is this money spent on these people? Do they deserve it, right? Why can't we just spend it on practical things? And if you believe that innovation is a good thing at all, and in many domains I do think it's a good thing, the problem is that you don't know what's going to work, right? And so when it's the most risky, I mean, in Swedish it's called risk capital. It's much more realistic about what's going on rather than venture, which sounds incredibly exciting and gung-ho. Risk capital is basically pretty aleatoric. You're not exactly sure what's going to come out. And I think that the readiness of venture capital to test things, right? Our company is an experiment, right? And we may crash and burn, but the investor will go, oh, okay, I got to have, breakfast, who cares, right? Whatever. And so we don't intend to crash and burn, by the way, but I'm just saying these things happen. And so that culture of testing, I think, is worth considering when we want new things. One of the reasons why that's not possible in architecture and why architecture is differentiated from other design professions is you can't test most of the fucking stuff, right? The cycle of actual true iteration is so slow and so capital intensive. The best you can hope for is vaguely visualizing things and using rules of thumb, and they evolve over a couple of generations. And so what's happening now is that actual technical testing cycles are becoming possible inside the built environment at every scale. And again, it's one of the things that should be differentiated and decoupled from the cynicism around these technologies, and not just for viewing and selling shit and having games and whatnot. Eye tracking on the Apple Vision headset is by far the best eye tracking that's ever been developed for any purpose. All the technology, by the way, that we all have is massively better than what militaries have. So be excited about what's being given to consumers. And the eye tracking is so good, and the resolution of the images is so good, and the perspective management that they have optimized is such that you can basically expect that you will have millimeter precise testing of spatial environments using the headset as one of the applications that will be launched very quickly. People walk into a space, where are they looking? How do they move? What is their feeling? Exactly to your point, right? If what we want to do is to make architecture that's data-driven rather than spectacle-driven, I think you've correctly smacked down my point that it's sexy shit. It's experience-driven rather than spectacle-driven. That should be tested, right? If people are saying, oh, well, all this fancy architecture is very speculative and very spectacle-oriented, let's just test it. See how people feel when they see a Zaha profile on the skyline or a Gary profile on the skyline. I mean, I know that Gary profiles annoy me, Zaha profiles sometimes excite me, we can test this. We can run experiments in the world. But if you want to have a participatory planning system, everyone needs Apple Vision headsets. I mean, it's happening, right? And so if you feel resistant or society feels resistant, just place the technical opportunities in front of the challenges we say we want to focus on. What do we have in public space? How do we know what's good? How do we design well, right? I mean, one of the things I think is going to come is basically through lighting and very simple design tricks that the Romans knew. We'll start getting rid of this idea that all the ceilings need to be rectilinear, basically. And that will create a sense of space which is very native to digital environments where you have essentially halo-type open-ended spaces with weird lighting effects. We can recreate that. That could be a health. That could be a pullback from the digital realm to the physical realm. And there's countless others. So let me ask you that question. What do you think is going to come back in terms of concrete design intervention, evolution and innovation will come back from this work?
Well, I answer this and then maybe see if anybody else has a question or a contribution, but what I'm most excited about, or what I anticipate, what I've been working on quite a bit and never really brought home into the real world environment, is this what I call responsive environment, now called creative adaptive environments, learning, robotic, architectural agents who participate in a life process and a communication and work collaborative process. And so because the hard thing is there's so many technical hurdles, but it also is the design effort to do it. And there are, of course, many artists who are doing these interactive installations, but they don't have no purpose. They don't do productive work. They're just there to display that you can have actuators, sensors and actuators and interaction, and you can have machine learning, and they maybe do funny things which mean nothing. So, and there's a friend of ours who want to work with a number of times, like Jason Bruce Studio. They have all these great projects, but they don't have a purpose. But in the metaverse, I think this will be easier to implement and experiment with. And since there is a lot, I see the same purposes to be fulfilled in the metaverse, and that we can make a more flexible, adaptive, and satisfying event dynamic, for instance, if we had not fixed, but mobile and transformable spaces, and that would be drawn back into the real, because we had learned how to design this. We had experience with how they work and how one talks about it. And so the discipline can learn these techniques, and clients can be convinced of them, and when you have more confidence, they would be applicable in the real world. For instance, that's one I definitely think is worthwhile, because everybody's craving for flexibility, particularly in large work environments. And it's been such a difficulty, because it's not about, a crew over the weekend shifting things around. They need to be responsive. But how to implement this, there are these hurdles. And I think there could be many others. Like, for instance, this overlaying of information. In the metaverse is easier. But you could, like graphic overlays, projections, you can bring that also into the real world, where a lot of walls are, screens and dot matrices of various resolutions and other things. You talked about light, and have that mean something, have that interactive part of these kind of responsive environments. I think that would migrate. So we were going to look at the physical world will transform in the image of the digital worlds we get used to, once we get used to. Now it's of course one way from the physical, we bring it into digital and implement it. Eventually, as this evolves and has new features, and exactly it's the same kind of similar events and sometimes integrated events, this will migrate over into the physical. And the biggest of all is of course that the parameters will finally become the global, unified style of the 21st century in terms of all design disciplines, digital, virtual, physical, architecture, and everything, because this is the tools which will flourish and proliferate within the metaverse world, and with another generation of architects and designers will make that palpable, and that the old ways of design is just simply no longer compatible.
So you need to come up with stuff if you want to contribute, because Patrik and I will keep talking to the heat death of the universe. Otherwise, yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of personal experience and shared experience, and who should have agency over the global experience, and just some thoughts or conversation.
Can you clarify what you mean by who should have control over the global experience? You mean like should platforms control? Is that what do you mean by the second part of the question?
Yes, like maybe the user participation or the platform controls it. Like basically there was discussion on responsiveness of environments and architecture to actions, but when there's multiple users involved in the experience, then the question is about who has the agency to sort of control this.
Well, I mean, this kind of responsive one isn't remote control that I now want this to move and please move. That takes too long, it's too effortful. It should be the robotic artificial learning creatures should anticipate, and they might respond to a single, or they might respond to a group and a larger crowd. And of course, in the end, who controls this? One, if it's a learning system, it's the experiences of the recursive crowd participants, teaching the systems to who have a kind of inbuilt utility maximization for them, or being maximally utilized and rewarded through good experiences they deliver. That's the way it is involved. Of course, initially, and the kind of learning, the system is the host. The host who wants to have a learning curve installed in the building, or responsiveness installed in the building, and that would be the various, it could be a museum, could be a corporate, could be a gallery, could be a school, a university. And I think when you talk about individual experiences versus shared experiences, I think that's when Jan was talking about you can tailor and individualize experiences. And that's true, but we also wonder if you come together in collective event, to what extent do you want that? Or it's just making something shared more accessible with respect to the individual kind of problems or deficiencies and cognition. But we have that in the metaverse now. The problem sometimes that you come into a space, and whenever you come, the video starts, but then you and it starts, somebody else comes 5 minutes later, you should also look at it from the start, but then they're asynchronous and they can talk about, oh, look at what's happening in the video. So there's always there's a trade-off there between individualizing, tailoring, and sharing out these. It's an interesting question, and we don't have the problems in the physical world where we are synchronized through the physical co-presence. In the virtual, we can desynchronize, and even further, we can have totally different perspectives onto the world, which is fascinating. I like to work with this, and when this was actually part of my key themes about multiple audiences, and if you have an ambiguously configured space without having any transformations or technical devices, you simply the different perceptual priors and priming you come into the space will be looked at, will appear differently, will be differently ordered for different audiences, but that means in this case that these audiences will not, they will have parallel lives and not integrated lives. So if you have to extend that an event has parallel lives, you can tailor and have everybody have a different look. If you want them to kind of react to the same kind of thing and share something, there needs to be at least sufficient overlap. Anyway, fascinating topic.
So on this point, I mean, one way of thinking about it is basically, what is the point of having a space if there's so little shared, enforced sharing of experience that all you have is disembodied consciousnesses engaging or chatting or whatever, right? So it's one way to kind of get into that and think about the role of, like, where the agency lies, to think about movies in 3D, right? What we know about movies right now is that they work because we have loads of cues and language from it, basically editing, but also how camera shots are set up. So if people are looking into the camera from different angles, we kind of think they're talking to each other, right? And the edit is cut in such a way that language is legible to us, right? And the reason why movies in 3D don't really work, and no one's really thought it through yet, is because you put people in 3D and they can look at the scene from any perspective, right? There might be a bunch of stuff going on there, bombs going off, all very exciting, but then there's a love scene in the corner, which is the main event, right? And if you're looking over there going, wow, all that stuff, the director's going, you have not seen the movie I made. You literally aren't even following the script, all right? So if you think of that balance, basically, autonomous agency by individuals experiencing space, and script or plot, and translate that to the spatial environment, I think you get something of the tension that Patrik's talking about, which is there's a need for there to be a meaning. There's already a meaning, and a need for that meaning in shared spaces, and some of that is authored and some of that is autonomous. And I think that is partly the story of architecture anyway. If somebody tells you how to interact with a space, it feels super regimented. But there's always a point at which it's just a box and you want to be there, right? And so if you take that across the creative domains, I think you have an interesting boundary for the question.
Just to quickly respond to that, we could also probably have a more curated experience that users can choose to sort of look at the movie in a certain way or experience a gallery in a certain way, but also give the opportunity for these charms and encounters that they discover by themselves.
Yeah, sorry, I want to interrupt. On that point, one of the challenges for Treasury in licensing terms is the tension between creators saying, that's how I want it to be, and somebody commissioning or licensing the asset saying, hey, can we just change the texture? Can we add a story? Can we add a feature? And the designer may say, no, that's absurd and hideous, just because it's your company logo or brand. They're not going to put it as a texture of the facade. Or, hey, that's kind of cool, we'll run with it. And to your point, I think that would be part of what happens, is that when assets are in space, the creator will say, well, the individual users may change the texture and change some of the orientations and change some of the interaction dynamics for that reason. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the event. It's been amazing. I'm actually working on a startup called Manoocherhri, which converts Revit files into Unreal Engine 3D experiences. And we just actually raised seed funding this month, so it's been really exciting for us. And seeing this on screen, it's just incredible for us. One of the key questions I get asked by investors when we're trying to raise this money was, obviously Revit's used by architects, and the countless architects we talk to get feedback sessions, they all want some sort of Unreal Engine or want to get into Unreal Engine. but they can't really, they haven't given me a clear idea on why should we use Unreal Engine. Do you, in your practice, do you see any sort of usage amongst your staff for the metaverse or 3D experiences in general?
Oh yeah, obviously, yes. We've been to this for many years, even before the metaverse idea came up again, which was COVID-induced. Basically, we had every project we had VR experiences for clients to get in and explore and move around, and it's been a great. Also at AADRL, we've used Unity and Unreal Engine and these kind of gaming engines for developing. Particular interaction scenarios and running agents and agent systems, exploring the space and making kinetic, transformable architecture. These tools are perfect for that. I'm just curious why you're using Revit as the base rather than Rhino, for instance.
Absolutely. Well, initially we wanted to create like a twin platform, where stakeholders that aren't technical, that don't have access to Revit, are able to sort of join the conversation on how that project looks like and provide feedback in multiple, maybe in different kind of ways. Right now, I'm an interior designer myself. I used to be an interior designer, and we'd give out amazing looking renders to our clients, and then they just scribble on it and then send it back in like maybe a screenshot or that kind of. It's just this asymmetric sort of feedback, this asymmetric communication where one person has all this power to create whatever, and the other person doesn't have the tools required to sort of meet that communication, right? And when I get the feedback, we try to interpret those words into a visual format and go back to the client and say, is that what you're looking for? And usually the case is no, that's not what we're looking for. Or they go like, maybe that's what we want. Or this is the reason why I'm working on something like this.
So this was one of the early questions I asked Patrik. He said, I don't deal with these technical things. Dismissed it to visual. It is one of the problems, right? Getting assets from where they are, which in many cases is Revit, into attractive real-time render formats. And there's at least two versions of that problem. One is that if you have assets in the form that they're in, generally speaking, they're not packaged for rendering. And so even if you put them into Unreal Engine and you say, hey, this is your thing, they go, well, that doesn't look like what I designed. It doesn't look like the static renders from V-Ray or whatever. So that's a whole loop in itself.
Absolutely.
Right? I think what will happen is that the design tools for spatial designers, architects, interior designers, modelers will be pre-optimized more and more, right? And so Bob McNeil and the guy who followed Anagnost at Autodesk, they realize it will be a problem for them, that their clients can't get their assets out into real-time render quickly enough. But the other thing that is a problem and will probably be solved exactly for the reason Patrik described, which is the amount of money and opportunity coming in, is that the render engines are going to get competed out. Right now, Unreal Engine is top dog, and Tim Sweeney thinks he's going to be a trillionaire, but maybe he won't be when Apple comes up with the render engine, when tons and billions of dollars goes into like rebooting OpenGL and whatnot. Because why fucking make Tim Sweeney render engines a commodity shit? The reason why Unreal Engine is free up to $1 million is because it doesn't cost him fucking anything once it's written. And so I think there'll be optimization on the supply side in terms of formats and how you get static assets out into real-time render without needing lots of conversion. But also, I don't think it will be the case in 10 years' time that we'll go, oh, well, Unreal Engine, that's the only game in town. The money is coming, they're going to break through that.
Absolutely.
That limitation factor.
Absolutely. Another use case that we were looking at is, manufacturers, they don't have access to design files. So we're trying to get their assets, using Unreal Engine, to upload their assets into the sort of 3D space, and then fold that right back into the 3D sort of Revit files or SketchUp files or any of these sort of file formats. That's something we're working on as well. Yeah.
Well, so we are at time, but I think we're going to hang around for some drinks and whatnot, so feel free to ask Patrik or myself or these guys. But just to mention, Jan and Jan Hoyf are actually part of the founding team of Treasury. Spaceform, which is an Unreal Engine viewing system in architecture, has contributed code and content to the platform, and Jan Bunger has been a genius connector bringing the threads together. So they're very modestly sitting there asking questions, but actually they're crucial to the development of Treasury. There are more sessions coming. These are the actual dates: 20th of January, 22nd February, and 11th of April. Those will go up on Eventbrite soon. I think they may need a slightly larger venue, but in any case, you get the general idea. And follow-up from our perspective is all that stuff, right? If you just write your company's name for Treasury.space, you can sign up that way. Otherwise, fiddle with that other stuff. And from my perspective, thank you for coming to our bit of the event. Thank you so much to Patrik and Zaha for partnering from the beginning and for hosting, and looking forward to seeing you at future events and through these channels.
Thanks, guys.